As a person who has definitely dealt with being edited out of context in order to be misrepresented, I know factually that happens. I got a lot of comments in my last video about how I should watch the full unedited BBC interview. The other night, I did indeed sit down and watch the entire interview, and I wanted to give you guys some of my thoughts from that because I actually did leave with a bit of an understanding of where some of Andrew Tate's followers are coming from. My general reaction to the edited BBC interview was that Andrew Tate did not do a good job. I thought that for an interview where we were supposed to watch it and feel like he is not guilty of the charges, he definitely didn't come off as innocent, and I found it fascinating that he would deny things that he objectively did say on video, and I viewed that as something that, at least in my own personal upbringing and my own understanding of masculinity, that's something that at least stereotypically I would not associate with masculinity, and I was very confused by why so many young boys and men seem to follow Andrew Tate and view him as a masculinity model. Now, I am inherently biased against Andrew Tate, especially as a survivor of sexual violence, especially as a former sex worker, especially as a woman. There are just so many things that I've heard him say that for me make it pretty clear he is a misogynist. So I'm more inclined to believe that the accusations are indeed true, just purely based on the things that I've heard him say. All that being said, I'm definitely somebody who is judging him on sound bites, and I completely feel like it's completely rational to do that. And I think the thing that a lot of his followers don't understand is that, yeah, that's how most people are going to see him. Most people are not going to watch the long, unedited interview to get the full breadth of the story. I think that Tate's fans need to accept that even though you may personally believe that most people know him for his good deeds, outside of your circle of pro-Tate fanboys, a lot of people see him as a misogynist, and that is unfortunately the dominant view. Maybe not among his fan base, but most people do indeed think of Andrew Tate as a misogynist. The big thing that Tate was up against is public opinion being so swayed by those clips. And the one thing that he could have done that would have really shifted things in a different direction was to actually answer some of the questions that the interviewer was asking. One of the reasons why I felt like watching this unedited interview is because I'm a YouTuber who has been interviewed. I've actually been interviewed by the BBC for a documentary about Ron Jeremy, who I mentioned in my last video. And I sat with the BBC for probably 2 hours doing an interview, and they only used 2 minutes of what I said. BBC edits interviews. The vast majority of interviews that you see are edited, even the long ones. I think the unedited video is a 38-minute long interview. It was never going to be a 38-minute piece. But that all being said, I know that when things are edited a certain way, they can come off a certain way. So I wanted to watch the unedited version of the interview to have a bit more of an objective view, because it's easy for me to criticize the way that Tate fans react to all this conversation. But part of me was curious whether or not this felt like a different interview if it was unedited. So I actually recorded my entire live reaction to that interview, and that video is going to be living on Nebula. Nebula is an amazing creator-owned streaming service that I'm part of, and many of your favorite YouTubers are also part of it. Legal Eagle, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, Todd in the Shadows, lots of people that make really great educational content on YouTube are also on Nebula. Most notably, Lindsay Ellis has made her return to online video and has uploaded several video essays on Nebula. There's one about Guy Fieri, about America's love affair with the controversial figure, and Lindsay Ellis is now exclusively uploading to Nebula. An annual membership of Nebula also comes bundled with Nebula classes, where creators give insight into their creative process. So if you're interested in any of those things that I mentioned, there's a link in the description box below for 40% off of an annual membership, and I hope you guys will enjoy my Nebula exclusive content. But for this video, I wanted to summarize my overall feelings for the unedited Andrew Tate BBC interview.
Andrew Tate. Hello. You've agreed to do an interview with the BBC today.
Yep.
The material is going to be published on television, on radio, online.
Perfect.
We are doing an interview with you because you're facing some very serious allegations.
Correct.
I'm going to start out right away by saying that I immediately was able to figure out a little bit of why Tate's fans were frustrated with the BBC, because the edited interview definitely is cut a certain way. A lot of what you hear was said in exact sequence, but there's definitely things that were left out that definitely add a bit more context for some of Tate's frustrations. So the first thing that I noticed in the unedited interview is that Tate definitely comes across as less confrontational. In the BBC interview, the cuts are so neat and so close together that you do feel a little bit like he's being really aggressive. And let's be clear, he is still quite defensive throughout this interview. He definitely does still avoid answering questions, which I'll get to in a bit. But he's definitely not as confrontational. And I will say that it seems like they definitely got all of the confrontational, bombastic moments and put all of those in the video. In the edited BBC interview, Lucy definitely comes off as pretty badass. She is sticking to her guns. She is sticking it to him or whatever. But if you watch the BBC interview, you notice that it doesn't really have an ending. It just ends with Tate ranting. But the reason why they did that is because there really wasn't an ending to this. Lucy ended up getting so frustrated with Andrew that she just had to end the interview.
The fact that I could do that on a podcast 5 years ago and only got 300 views, now I understand I'm the most influential man on the face of the planet. I would be more careful with certain things I say. That doesn't mean the things I originally said were genuinely out to harm people.
Do you really believe you're the most influential man on the face of the planet?
I'm the most Googled person on the planet.
Do you believe you're the most influential man on the face of the planet?
I'm the most Googled man on the planet.
I think we're done.
Thanks, Lucy. It was enjoyable.
So in a way, she definitely did not come off as strong. What's also pretty clear in the interview is that Lucy is not a fan of Tate. And I don't know why people expected this to go any other way. In the unedited interview, it starts with Tate establishing that they were begging him for an interview. They were constantly chasing him down. And the reason why they agreed to the interview is apparently because Lucy sent him a series of very softball questions. Now, here's the thing. Going into the unedited interview, I had two really big points of contention that I really hoped were going to be answered if I watched the unedited video. My first point of contention is that Lucy quoted verbatim something that Andrew Tate did indeed say. And I wondered if there was more context in the unedited video for him outright denying this. Because one of the things that he does mention throughout the edited interview is that some of the comments that he made were jokes. He references jokes and Lucy presses him on the idea that some of these comments were jokes. And I was frustrated with the fact that he never actually answered that, because there's videos of him literally saying all those things that she asked him if he said.
You cannot get a girl to work for you having fucked. So the recruitment process is the same as the PhD course. You message them on Instagram. The PhD course is my recruitment system. I don't mention webcam until after I've had sex with the girl. If you're on dates and you're trying to mention it and shit, it just doesn't work. It puts them off. I'd never do that. That's disgusting. I'm not a whore. It's just not gonna work. You continue as normal, no mention of webcam. You fuck the girl. After you fuck the girl, you do the PhD test. If she passes the PhD test and she wants to be with you, then you start mentioning things like, yeah, but you know, you're always busy, you're always at work, you can come work for me.
You have said, my job was to meet a girl, go on a few dates, sleep with her, get her to fall in love with me to the point where she'd do anything I say, and then get her on webcam so we could become rich together.
I don't think that's what I personally said.
So we factually know that he did indeed say those things. But in the interview, Tate doesn't actually deny saying that. And one of the reasons why he gives is because he is in the middle of a trial. Like, he can't talk about certain things because saying certain things would incriminate himself. And this lies my problem. In the interview, Tate describes himself as having emotional control. He also describes himself as being stoic. And in my personal opinion, a stoic man who was in control of his emotions would not have said yes to this interview and then carried on the way that he carried on. And I feel that way predominantly because it just all of this seems like a bad idea. Every point of it seems like a bad idea. The idea that the BBC would not want to ask him about the trial is pretty optimistic. It's the thing that everyone's talking about. I know that his fans think, why don't we ask him about the good deeds that he does? It's clear that Tate and his fans wanted the BBC to do an interview with him that somehow humanized him. It was supposed to be like a profile, a sit-down conversation where two people get to know each other or something like that. But that's ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. It's ridiculous and optimistic.
They're under house arrest because there's an ongoing investigation into rape and human trafficking allegations against
Correct. I've been incarcerated without charge. And don't you think
the rape allegation
it's been dropped?
Has been incarcerated for.
Correct. So I'm incarcerated without charge, and I think that would be a far more interesting conversation than, I guess, Julian Assange is incarcerated without charge, and nobody's interested in that either.
And my overall issue with Tate was that he spent so much time criticizing the BBC as being out to get him, not actually being interested in the facts. He had a lot of criticisms for the BBC and ultimately still said yes to this interview, which for me definitely is another example of the lack of emotional control. It's poor decision making. There was nothing about this interview that was ever going to work. And before you go to trial is probably not the best time to take an interview. Tate's expectation of the interview was that it was going to be about his false incarceration. He wanted to do an interview about why it was unjust for him to go to prison. And it's on that he agreed to do the interview. From what he reports, he was not expecting the questions that he received in the actual interview. And that's why he was so frustrated. The fact that he felt like he had agreed to a softball, humanizing interview about why he was imprisoned, and what he actually got were questions about the trial, which he couldn't answer. And there was just a lot of frustration around that, a lot of frustration around, why are you asking me questions about things that I can't answer, which I'm going to repeat. All of that is a good reason to not do the interview. And here's my thought. I think that if you're going to do an interview like this, the idea should be that you are going to sway the audience. And again, the best way to do that would be to answer the questions. But because you can't answer the questions, it's the worst time to do the interview. It's the absolute worst time to do the interview. Now, the context that you actually do get from the unedited interview is that his description of some of these comments as jokes was not in reference to the video that he made where he very clearly described meeting a woman, having sex with her, and then coercing her into sex work. What he was actually referencing were some of the clips that we mentioned, some of the clips where he is saying objectively misogynistic things. And one of the surprising things I got from this interview was that he does, to some degree, seem to take responsibility for his reach. He basically says that before he was as known as he was, he made certain comments on podcasts that got 300 views. Not a lot of people were watching it, and he felt that's not such a big deal. But now that he has a much larger audience, he definitely feels more responsible for some of those comments. So those are comments that he says at this point in his life he wouldn't make. Now, those comments were jokes. Those comments weren't meant to be taken seriously, according to him. But ultimately, he does seem to understand that joking in that way, at the very least, doesn't make him look good. So when I made my video, I got a lot of comments about understanding hyperbole, and I didn't really understand what people were referring to when they said that. But watching the unedited video, I got a little bit of where they were coming from, because there's a couple of moments where Lucy mentions some very particular comments that Tate made, and some of these comments are very obviously hyperbolic. For example, he apparently stated that he was the most dangerous man in the world, and that's something that I would definitely read as hyperbolic. It's obviously a joke in my opinion. She was really trying to hit that point, basically trying to say, you said that you're the most dangerous man in the world, why shouldn't we believe you? And it's clear to me that Lucy comes from I want to fight for these women perspective. And to be clear, I'm definitely somebody who's aligned on that end of the conversation. But I think that there is a part of that that didn't allow her to understand that some of the things that he was saying were indeed not serious. He wasn't literally saying that he was the most dangerous man in the world. He was being hyperbolic. But here's my thing when it comes to Andrew Tate. I know that his followers don't see it, and I'm totally convinced that it's a cult. But he has said so many more demonstrably misogynistic things that it's not really outside of the realm of possibility for him to have done these things and to be a misogynist. To me, it's silly to argue against the idea that he's a misogynist. In the unedited interview, he talks a lot about how he makes podcasts that are all about providing for women. Like his idea of promoting women, fighting for women, advocating for women, defending women is being a provider. And through most of this, he endlessly describes women as females. Now, in my personal opinion, men who default to the description of women as females tend to be misogynistic. You don't commonly hear people describe men as males. I did it in my last video to be kind of ironic, but you don't really hear very many people refer to men as males. But it's definitely more common for people like Andrew Tate to say females when they mean women. And so that for me is a red flag. It's definitely a red flag. And I think it's funny that his idea of advocating for women is this like one particular way of interacting with a woman that of course you have to be sleeping with, that of course you have to be attracted to. My ultimate conclusion after watching the unedited interview, it's in all reality not that different from the edited interview. The unedited interview definitely makes him seem less confrontational, and it also makes Lucy seem like not as strong and badass as she comes off in the BBC interview. But at the end of the day, what's in the interview is still pretty accurate to what was portrayed. He still avoids answering the question that was asked of him. All of the standard defensive things that he said were indeed included in the video. There's a few things that are clearly fudged out of order, but for the most part, it's all pretty aligned. It's clear that she was speaking in sound bites in certain points, and that's pretty clear in the unedited version of the interview. But that all being said, Lucy was doing her job. To me, watching the unedited interview also really nailed home that she doesn't know too much about Andrew Tate. She's not obsessed with him or hyper-focusing on him or trying to get his information, trying to be close to him or whatever. She's literally just doing her job. And it seems like she is very sympathetic towards some of the women who have been harmed by him. And I think she probably viewed this as her stepping forward and standing up for them. And I think, honestly, that she did a decent job at it. I think that ultimately the interview should not have happened because both the BBC and Andrew Tate had completely different goals. They set down with goals that were the antithesis of each other. They need for him to answer questions about the trial. He wanted for people to not talk about the trial, but talk about his unfair imprisonment, which of course is talking about the trial. There's just no context where this interview would not have gone the way that it went. And I think before you should set up cameras to make sure that they don't misrepresent you, you should just say no to the interview. And that's the thing. A couple of people have asked me about this. What would I do if I was in Tate's situation? And if I was in Tate's situation, something that would never happen, but let's say that I was in Tate's situation, I would not say yes to this interview. I would not. I quite regularly say no to interviews that are done by people in the media that I don't really trust. I pretty regularly say no. It's pretty rare that I actually say yes to an interview, if I'm being completely honest. So if you're one of the people that's interviewed me, it's because I believed in you and thought that you had something important that you were working on. When I was interviewed by the BBC, I wanted to be interviewed because I believed in validating the fact that Ron Jeremy assaulted women. I needed to do that because for me, that was the reason I spoke out, and I needed for people to understand as a person who didn't feel too traumatized by the experience that he does this is something that happens. So that's why I spoke to the BBC, and I don't feel bad about it because I knew exactly what I was going to get out of it and what they were going to get out of it, and I only was looking to help. So to me, there's so much more on stake for Andrew Tate, and I don't know why he said yes to this interview. But anyway, like I said, you can see my live full reaction to the full Andrew Tate interview if you go to Nebula. You can sign up with the link in my description box and get 40% off of an annual membership. That is the way to do it. And I will be uploading more things to Nebula as Nebula exclusives. I'm about to embark on some bigger projects right now, and I'm doing a series of interviews and things for that. And a lot of those interviews are going to be uploaded in their completion to Nebula. So subscribe now so you can check that stuff out later down the line. And yeah. Okay, now I really hope this is the last time I talk about Andrew Tate. I've spoken enough about him. This is about as much as I can handle. Anyway, on that note, I want you to always remember and never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.